Healing is an invisible process because it takes place inside the depths of your psyche long before it becomes obvious to the outside world. Carl Jung believed that true healing is not a dramatic transformation that suddenly appears in your life like a miracle, but rather a gradual return of inner order, a reconciliation with your own unconscious, and a rediscovery of the parts of yourself that were once rejected, abandoned, or wounded. Most people assume they are broken for far longer than they actually are, because the ego always focuses more on what still needs to be fixed, rather than acknowledging the enormous progress already made beneath the surface. This is why Jung often said that people are rarely aware of the moments when they begin to heal, because those moments feel quiet, subtle, and almost unimpressive compared to the storms that created the wounds in the first place. The truth is that you have likely healed far more than you give yourself credit for, because healing rarely makes noise, and the ego is poor at recognizing peace when peace finally arrives. Instead of noticing the growth, we notice the remnants of pain. Instead of noticing the strength we've gained, we notice the scars that remain. And instead of acknowledging how far we have come, we obsess over how far we believe we still need to go. Jung emphasized that real transformation happens in the unconscious first, and the conscious mind catches up only later. So when you finally start to feel a shift in your life, that shift did not begin today. It began months or even years ago, long before you could articulate it. This is why one of the first signs that you have healed more than you realize is that you begin responding to pain differently. You begin responding to life differently. And perhaps most importantly, you begin responding to yourself differently. The battles that once overwhelmed you no longer define you. The memories that once tortured you no longer control you. And the people who once triggered you no longer possess the same emotional power they used to. Healing is not about pretending you never suffered. Healing is about realizing that your suffering no longer dictates your identity. Jung believed that whenever you confront your shadow and integrate it, you regain lost vitality and lost personality. You retrieve a part of your soul that was stuck in the past. You retrieve a piece of yourself you had forgotten. And when that happens, you start noticing a quiet inner strength emerging. A strength that no longer depends on external validation or approval, because it comes from your own self-knowledge, your own self-trust, and your own ability to carry yourself through darkness and come out stronger. Another sign that you have healed more than you realize is that your triggers no longer have the same intensity or frequency they once had. In Jungian psychology, triggers are invitations from the unconscious, signals that unresolved wounds still hold emotional charge. When you are unhealed, even small comments or small situations can feel overwhelming because they awaken old pain that has not yet been processed. But when you begin to heal, those triggers lose their power. You no longer feel possessed by your emotions. You no longer feel hijacked by your reactions. Instead, you find yourself pausing, observing, and choosing your response with intention, rather than reacting impulsively out of fear or insecurity. Jung believed that the ability to observe your own emotional reaction without being consumed by it is a profound sign of psychological maturity. It means the unconscious wound has been metabolized. It means the shadow no longer has control over you. It means the past is no longer dictating your present. When you can feel something deeply, without letting it destroy your inner stability, you have healed far more than you think. When someone's words no longer send you into a spiral of self-doubt, you have healed. One of the clearest signs that you have healed more than you realize, according to Jungian principles, is the quiet return of emotional clarity. Emotional clarity is not emotional perfection, nor is it the absence of negative feelings. Emotional clarity is the understanding of what you feel, why you feel it, and what part of your inner landscape the emotion is coming from. For most of your life, especially during periods of unhealed trauma, your emotional world can feel like a chaotic storm without direction or explanation. You might feel sadness without knowing the source. You might feel anger without knowing the trigger. You might feel anxiety without knowing the cause. Jung believed that this emotional confusion is a symptom of separation from the unconscious. It means your inner world is filled with unresolved conflicts, repressed memories, and unintegrated shadows. But as you heal, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You start to understand your own emotions in real time. You start to recognize what belongs to the past and what belongs to the present. You start to differentiate between real danger and imagined danger. This ability to decode your emotional landscape is one of the most profound signs of psychological maturity, because it means that you are no longer drowning in unconscious impulses. Instead, you are navigating your inner world with awareness, intuition, and growing wisdom. Emotional clarity means you can say, "I am upset, but I understand why," rather than letting the feeling control your actions. It means you can recognize when an emotion is a message rather than a threat. It means you can hold space for your own pain without letting it consume you. This shift is a powerful sign that you have healed more than you think. Emotional clarity also means that you become more honest with yourself than you have ever been before. Jung insisted that self-honesty is the foundation of individuation because it allows you to confront your shadow without fear or denial. When you are unhealed, self-honesty often feels terrifying because it forces you to admit truths that the ego is not ready to face. You might bypass your pain with positivity. You might deny your loneliness by keeping yourself constantly busy. You might hide your shame behind accomplishments or relationships. But when you begin to heal, you stop running from these truths. You start admitting what hurts. You start acknowledging what needs to change. You start facing the parts of yourself that once felt unbearable to confront. Jung believed that this self-honesty is the beginning of freedom, because honesty is what dissolves illusions, and illusions are what keep people trapped in endless suffering. When you no longer lie to yourself about who you are, what you want, what you feel, or what you tolerate, you have already healed more than most people ever will. Healing is not about perfection. Healing is about truth. When you start telling the truth to yourself, you have reclaimed your inner authority. You have taken back the power your trauma once held over you. You have made your inner world safe enough to confront, explore, and inhabit fully. Another sign that you have healed more than you realize is the emergence of inner stillness. Inner stillness is not the same as silence. It is not the absence of thought. It is not a forced state of calm. It is a natural sense of grounded peace that arises when your psyche is no longer in survival mode. When you are unhealed, your mind is constantly racing because it is scanning for threats, anticipating rejection, worrying about the future, or replaying the past. The ego becomes hypervigilant because it believes that danger is always near. This state of mental chaos prevents inner stillness from ever emerging. But as you heal, this hypervigilance dissolves. Your nervous system begins to relax. Your thoughts become slower, softer, and more intentional. You stop overanalyzing everything. One of the most profound signs that you have healed more than you realize is the quiet emergence of self-trust, a psychological shift that Carl Jung considered essential to the individuation process. Self-trust is not arrogance, nor is it blind confidence. Self-trust is the deep certainty that you can handle whatever life presents, even when the path feels unclear, even when you do not have all the answers, and even when fear whispers its familiar stories in the background of your mind. Most people think they need to be healed first before they can trust themselves. Jung taught the opposite. He believed that trusting yourself is a major indicator that your healing is already well underway. When you begin to trust your intuition, your decisions, your judgment, and your ability to navigate uncertainty, you are stepping into the most authentic version of yourself. In the unhealed state, people constantly question themselves. They second-guess their choices. They rely too heavily on others for direction. They fear making mistakes. They wait for permission to act. They distrust their own feelings because past trauma taught them that their inner world is unsafe. But when you begin to heal, a remarkable shift happens. Your intuition becomes clearer. Your voice becomes stronger. Your fear loses authority. You stop outsourcing your decisions to others. You begin to trust that you can choose, act, adapt, recover, and grow. This self-trust is not loud or boastful. It is calm, quiet, and grounded. It appears in the way you move, the way you speak, the way you carry yourself, and the way you face life's challenges. When you realize that you no longer panic as easily as before, or that you can stay calm during uncertainty, or that you no longer feel the need to seek approval for every action you take, This is a powerful confirmation that you have healed far more than you know. Another sign of deep healing is your changed relationship with the past. Jung believed that unresolved trauma keeps people psychologically frozen at the age or stage when the wound first occurred. You might grow physically, socially, and professionally, but emotionally you remain stuck in the same place where you were hurt. This is why people repeat the same relationship patterns, attract similar hurts, sabotage their own progress, or struggle to feel worthy. The unhealed psyche constantly replays its pain through present experiences. But as you heal, your connection to the past changes in subtle but powerful ways. The emotional weight of old memories begins to dissolve. The stories that once brought you shame no longer have the same grip. The regrets that once haunted you begin to soften. The moments that once triggered deep sorrow now feel distant, like echoes from another lifetime. You stop identifying with your wounds. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of what happened. You begin to look at your past with objectivity rather than emotional overwhelm. Jung believed that this shift is a powerful sign of integration because it shows that the psyche has processed the wound rather than suppressing it. When you can look back on your past without drowning in it, you have healed. When you can understand your past without blaming yourself, you have healed. When you can speak about your old pain without shaking, collapsing, or spiraling, you have healed. When you can finally say, I wish it didn't happen, but it no longer controls me, you have healed more than you think. Healing does not erase the memory. It removes the suffering attached to the memory. And when that suffering dissolves, the past loses its power to define your future. Another powerful sign of healing is your new ability to choose solitude without feeling lonely. Jung believed that the ability to be alone comfortably is one of the greatest indicators of psychological strength because it shows that you are no longer dependent on external noise to distract you from your inner world. One of the most powerful signs that you have healed more than you realize is the transformation of your inner dialogue, because the way you speak to yourself reveals the true condition of your psyche far more accurately than any external reality ever can. In Jungian psychology, the inner dialogue is the voice of the ego, the shadow, the inner child, and the unconscious all interacting with one another. When someone is unhealed, this inner dialogue becomes harsh, chaotic, critical, fearful, and fragmented. The unhealed person often hears a voice that tells them they are unworthy, unlovable, weak, incapable, or doomed to repeat the same mistakes forever. They live in a constant state of self-doubt because their inner world is ruled by the echoes of past wounds, past traumas, and past rejections. But as you heal, this internal voice gradually changes, sometimes so quietly that you do not even notice the transformation happening. The voice that once criticized you begins to encourage you. The voice that once doubted you begins to trust you. The voice that once replayed your failure begins to acknowledge your progress. You start speaking to yourself with kindness rather than cruelty. You start offering yourself patience rather than punishment. You start giving yourself compassion rather than criticism. Jung believed that this shift in inner dialogue is one of the most significant signs of integration, because it shows that the previously fragmented parts of the psyche have begun to collaborate rather than compete. Your inner child feels safe, your shadow feels acknowledged, your ego feels supported, and your higher self feels heard. The war inside you begins to end, not because you have eliminated suffering, but because you have learned to hold your suffering with understanding. Another sign that you have healed more than you recognize is the emergence of emotional responsibility. Emotional responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for everything that happens. It means recognizing which emotions arise from within you and which emotions are simply reactions influenced by your environment. When you are unhealed, you may blame others for the pain you carry, believe that your happiness depends on someone else's behavior, or expect others to repair the wounds they did not create. Jung believed that this projection of responsibility is a symptom of psychological immaturity because it prevents the ego from confronting its own involvement in emotional patterns. But as healing deepens, a remarkable shift occurs. You begin taking ownership of your emotional reactions. You begin noticing how your wounds shape your responses. You begin recognizing when your fear, insecurity, or past trauma is influencing your present behavior. You stop blaming others for feelings that actually arise from unresolved parts of yourself. You begin asking, why does this trigger me? Instead of, why are they doing this to me? You begin choosing curiosity over defensiveness. You begin choosing honesty over denial. You begin choosing accountability over blame. Jung emphasized that emotional responsibility is essential for individuation, because only by acknowledging your internal patterns can you gain the power to change them. When you stop making others responsible for your emotions and begin managing your emotional landscape with maturity, you have healed far more than you think. Emotional responsibility frees you from dependency. Emotional responsibility frees you from victimhood. Emotional responsibility frees you from repeating the same painful cycles. And this freedom is one of the greatest indicators that your inner world has grown stronger, wiser, and more integrated. Another sign of deep healing is the diminishing need for external validation. Jung taught that people who lack inner wholeness constantly look outward for feedback, approval, and reassurance. They feel incomplete and therefore depend on the opinions of others to feel valuable. The final and most powerful sign that you have healed more than you realize is the quiet transformation that turns you into the person you once hoped someone else would be for you. Because healing, when it reaches its deepest layers, does not merely remove pain, but reshapes your very identity, your habits, your emotional patterns, and your sense of purpose. And one day you wake up and recognize that the strength you looked for in others now lives within you. The clarity you once begged the world to give you now rises naturally from your own intuition. And the compassion you desperately needed from the outside has become the compassion you effortlessly offer to yourself. This shift does not happen through force, but through countless small moments. Every time you chose awareness over reaction, every time you faced the discomfort you used to run from, every time you admitted the truth you once avoided, and every time you refused to abandon yourself, no matter how overwhelming the situation felt. And these seemingly ordinary decisions slowly assembled a new version of you, one that is solid, grounded, and awake. Jung believed that true healing is a return to the self, not the ego self that tries to impress the world, but the deeper self that knows its value without needing validation. And when this deeper self emerges, you no longer feel lost because your internal compass finally works, directing you through uncertainty without panic and through challenges without self-doubt. And this is precisely why healed people radiate calm in situations that once would have destroyed them. You begin to realize that you no longer crumble under emotional pressure because you have learned how to hold yourself through the storm rather than collapsing inside it. And your resilience is no longer a mask, but a genuine inner power built through the discipline of self-awareness, reflection, and acceptance. This is when your past stops controlling you, not because you forget it, but because you understand it, integrate it, and transform it. And Jung taught that the moment a wound becomes conscious, it begins to lose its power, which means that every insight you gained along your healing journey has become a tool rather than a burden. You may notice that you naturally set boundaries without guilt, because you finally understand that your peace is not negotiable, your energy is not unlimited, and your worth is not measured by how much you tolerate. And this ability to protect your well-being is one of the strongest markers that you have grown into a healthier psychological state. You also begin to inspire others without even trying, because there is something unmistakably powerful about a person who has walked through darkness and emerged with self-respect, self-understanding, and emotional depth. And people sense this transformation not through your words, but through your presence, your decisions, and your silence. The same traits that once made you feel misunderstood now make you magnetic. The emotional sensitivity that once hurt you becomes emotional intelligence, and the depth that once isolated you becomes your greatest strength. And all of this is proof that healing does not erase who you are, but reveals who you were always meant to be beneath the fear, the trauma, the expectations, and the emotional scars. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And when you have healed deeply, you finally see how true this is, because your life begins to align with your authenticity rather than with survival patterns. And this alignment brings a sense of inner harmony that cannot be faked or taken away. The healed version of you does not chase, beg, or cling because you no longer believe that love must be earned through suffering. And you do not fear being alone, because solitude has become a space for clarity instead of a punishment. You trust yourself, you trust life, and you trust that meaning will continue to reveal itself.